SR500 1978 2J2. It was running like a rocket. I was riding it last night, but it's got a bit of a rattle in its top end, and there's a few other things I've got to do to it. 80,000 k's ago I noticed that there was a dog missing off one of the sides of one of the gears. It dropped out when I was giving it its first oil change, but as I said, that was 80,000 k's ago. It had 62 or 63 or 64,000 k's on it when I got it, I can't recall offhand. And I've done another 80,000 k's in 7 years since then. So it's got about 143,000 k's or something at the moment on it. Before I get into explaining what this video is really about, which is the difference between, or the lack of differences between 400 and 500 heads, but where differences do exist, I just want to explain about, I had a hard time getting this off. The fella I'd gotten this bike off, he'd over tightened a lot of things, but this isn't really to do with that. It was probably just corrosion around the little sleeves that go around the studs that sleeve it into the, sleeve the rocket box into the top of the head sort of thing. But I opened it up by using this wedge in there, and then that got it open up high enough that I could put this little paint scraper in here and then change sides and put the WD and stuff in. But what I think could have happened from me doing that, because if you put that on there, the front fin is higher than the back fin. If you're going to do it, because there's no supports on these early heads, the later heads have got an aluminium little joiner in here. There's an aluminium joiner over this side, and you've got the sort of rubber dampener things in the front. But it might have been a better idea if I'd have packed under here to bring it up so it was level on both of them. But I wedged that in there, and once I got it opened up a bit, I started working around the paint scraper. But it's a really nice, smooth, old, used paint scraper that's all, there's no burrs or sharp edges or anything on it. And that's how you'd want them to be. But it might have been I'm a bit concerned I bent this here, but I can't really see it in between the fins. It looks the same gap between them all, so hopefully I'm just dreaming. But that would all lay down on there without rocking now. So I think it would have been an idea to put a slither of plywood or a piece of aluminium or something underneath this, just to bring that up to the same height, just in case it can be damaged here if you're doing one of those early heads. Another way of doing it would be to attack it from this side, screw that out 3 or 4 mil, and you're working more over the aluminium stay thing here, and have two nice little paint scrapers that are not sharp. And then once you've got it up a bit, put one in one side, one in the other side, and then bang these, or there, with a block of wood to get it to rock on the paint scrapers. And you could also put the kickstart back on and roll it over where maybe the camshaft working against the rockers and springs might help pop it up as well. But just thought I'd sort of mention that, because it was a bit of an issue getting that off. Now, can I wrestle it back off? There was a wise old fella on YouTube, and he was saying that the bearings can wear. Well, you can definitely see slop in that bearing. And if you lift this chain up, you'll see it lifts up off the sprocket. Well, that's sort of a way of telling you your chain's flogged out on a drive chain on your wheel. You see if you can sort of pinch it up like that. So it's done 80,000 k's this chain. It came with a standard original piston in a Wiseco 87.5mm box, so I imagine there's an 87.5mm Wiseco piston in this, and it came with the standard piston in a box, and it also came with the old timing chain. So I'd say this timing chain's done 80,000 k's, or a bit over it, because I'd say it was probably done just before I brought the bike. There's wear on the tops of these, where they're very concaved in. You can sort of see little burrs and that on that. Well, that can create noises as well. I've replaced the screws that go in there a few times, but at first it sort of helped, but in the end it wouldn't help, and I couldn't tune the rattle out of it, even though I sort of regularly tune the thing. Now, this is a valve out of a 400 head I brought, and if you look at that, the collet seems to sit, you know, with nearly 2 mil to the end of the valve. These aren't worn as near as much as the ones in the bike, but it makes me wonder if these have been over sort of ground down or something. Maybe this just runs a different collet, but it's out of a late model 400 head. Would have been a Jap import, but it's post 1984. It's an 85 on type head, and I'll explain all that in a moment. But it's a 2J2 number on it, so it's still the same valve. This comes in a 500. I was told the 400 head, I brought a 400 head for parts, and I was told that the 400 head is all the same, or this valve's out of it, it seems appropriate, except I was told by a guy from Moston Industries, I think they're called, in Brisbane, and they're like a cafe racer shop, and I was told that the 400 cam wasn't compatible, but I think he was mistaken, and I'll get onto that in a moment. But anyway, so that's that. Oh, except I'll just show you this while I'm posing off. This is my flywheel holder. I copied it off one I saw on eBay. This side's doubled up because it's the side that would push, the other side would pull, and it was flexing, so I've doubled this side up, and I've just drilled some holes in it and put like pieces of 3/8 bolts or something in it, but I've counterstunk the edges slightly and then riveted them over. You end up with a blind rivet where you don't know what to see. It's a really good way of fixing steel. I've done one in that end for the bearing. You can see it's like blind on that side, but there's actually a little brass bush or something I put in there to make sure it would never sort of seize up. If I could have improved it, I could have made it longer. Something else I just want to say before I carry on too much. If you're looking at spare parts, parts catalogue, a spare parts book, and I happen to have an original one for this thing, covering all that torn up on it, but it's a good old book. It doesn't give a separate part number for this top rocker box, I call this thing. They seem to be a match pair with the head. And I imagine that's for the, they machine it through for the bearings and things, I suppose. But you'd probably chance putting another one on. But they seem to come as a match pair. I just thought I'd point that out because, as I said, there's not a separate part number on them. Now, this is a 400 cam. Well, I believe it's a 400 cam. I was told this head's a 400. And this fella in Brisbane said that this cam won't work in this motor. Well, if you look on the Yamaha site, they sell a cam and they explain that their cam will work, but in bikes from 85 on, and it doesn't seem to matter if it's 400 or 500, their cam will work. But if you're putting it in a bike that's older than, newer than a 84, so post 84, 85 on, you've got to use the rockers off the early model cam. So there's a difference, appears to be, not just in the cam but the rockets themselves. It looks like there might be a slightly different gap between these two lobes, and there could be a different gap here where it goes to the, I suppose that's tacho drive. I did measure it and there does seem to be a difference in them. I won't go into what those measurements were, I'd have to look at them again. But it seems to be that you can change your cams, whether you're changing from a 4 to a 500 or a 5 to a 400, but if it's after 84 onwards, you've got to use, if you're using the early cam in that, you've got to use the early rockers with it. And I imagine you could use this cam in an early motor if you use the late rockers, which contradicts what the fella in Brisbane said. But as I said, I'd be going more by the Yamaha side, I think. You can buy cheap new cams. They've got the proper Yamaha part number on them. They're on eBay and they're selling them in Israel for about $100 Australian or something, or $125 Australian or something. Then it's about $80 postage to get it here, but I think that'd probably be a cheap new cam. There's some other aftermarket Japanese cam, but they're supposed to be standard. And they say they fit 400 or 500, but they don't seem to be mentioning about the difference in the rockers. Now, this is the box off the top of the head I was told was a 400. And some people, you'll find videos and people mentioning that the shaft inside here can wear on them, that the rockers rock on. Like a layer strip nearby. The shaft in here is supposed to be able to wear, and to get around it, they put grub screws in these places here. There's a round caster mark there, and I suppose you'd pick that up, and you probably could put one in this side. You could probably put 2 grub screws in there, and that's supposed to put pressure on the shaft, because the shafts, I've heard, can wear into the heads, and they get a slight rattle up from that. And there's 4 of these spots here. As I said, you'd probably be able to put 4 grub screws in it without a real drama. Makes me think little bolts would be better. Even if you ground them down a bit and used a half nut with them to lock them in there or something, with some Loctite or something. But the difference you can see on the rockers, and it shows it on the Yamashima side, or whatever it's called. The early heads have got an oil gallery here, passageway there, and the late heads have got it there. Now that's one obvious difference. I think that these are spaced slightly different, but it's just be slight, you know, but I think, you know, one could be a milli out to another and that sort of thing. Now, where you'd put grub screws in that one, this one comes with screws. Apparently the ones I heard 84 on, but it might be the 85 one, come with an actual screw in there that's supposed to do the same trick. I mean, it comes from factory like it. So, apparently you can change the cams from late model to early model, I believe, but you'd have to be using these late model rockers in the early head, or if you put a early cam in a late one, or like a Yoshishima or whatever it's called, or you'd have to get early rockers to go with the early cam. So I think you can change them. There seems to be no difference in the cam or the way it will make the bike function by what I'm seeing. But you've got to use, if you use a late cam, you've got to use late rockers. If you use an early cam, you've got to use early rockers, whether you swap them over or not. It doesn't seem to matter if it's 400 or 500. I think that's about it. Oh no, there's another difference here. This goes from there to there. This has like a spacer in there, like a spring sort of thing, or I don't know what it is, some sort of shim. It looks like it's shaped like a spring. There's a bit of a tag hanging off it there. And so that's another difference, another obvious difference. It might help you identify what's what. Hope this is helpful.